So, hello everyone, and thank you for this possibility to present this paper, which is really a work in progress. So you will see that there is no result, okay? And this is only some possible research question. And I would like, of course, to be really grateful if it's possible for you to give me some advice about some database, because this is something that I really have to look if it's possible to match this with this conceptual framework. So the first article was based on the idea that there is some possible relationship between recognition. I will explain what is the concept of recognition and subjective well-being. And after that, using the World Database of Happiness, we try to see in a much more broad view, which is not the philosophical one, if there is some correlational finding. And we also proved that there is some, but it was not the philosophical one in this case. And recently, it is a French article, we tried to enlarge this view in the climate issues. So at the beginning, the motivation was this one, finally, is to avoid this kind of dismal science and to say that, in fact, social interaction is really important. And how to avoid this kind of, for example, quote, and to consider that, of course, we need to have social interaction, of course, to understand both economic issues, but also, again, something which is, as you know, happiness. And it was really good to see that there are many people who work on this field, especially also Stefano, Francesco, Kelsey, and other, of course. And it was really a good surprise to see that, in fact, yes, we are many results to show that, of course, there is a positive link between social capital and well-being. Also, this one, as you know, of course, our study will show that during the long term, in fact, we have this kind of positive relationship. But also what we observe, the fact that today we have this kind of positive relationship, but also in the same time, do you hear me? Also in the same time, you observe that something happened, in fact. It means that there is a kind of, thanks to this approach, the defensive growth, we observe a poverty in terms of relationship and something also better in terms of growth. So something happened, and maybe it is a way to explain maybe the Easterlin paradox, or what we call the negative endogenous growth. And maybe it could be interesting to try to ask about the climate change issues. So I just put some interesting article about this different research. So after my thinking, my reflection was this one. So we know that there is a positive link between relationship and subjective well-being, but finally, why? How to explain, how to explore more, in fact, that it could be emotion, it could be, of course, many ways to explain that. And one of my possible angle was to say that we can use maybe this concept of recognition and to open this kind of black box in order to understand this relationship between people, but also a relationship between people and the society as a whole, because the other is not only a person, is it a society as a whole, as you will see. And the research question is this one, is why finally we have this kind of positive relationship between subjective well-being and social capital? Because maybe of this vital need for recognition for people. It's really a vital need. It means like an ontological need for people. Without kind of recognition, in fact, people will just have some social die or something like social death or something like this. And in fact, people are always looking for this kind of mutual recognition. This is maybe a goal of each one. And how to link this with the climate change issues, and this is maybe another step, is maybe possible to say that finally we have this kind of situation because, as you remember, Martin, for example, this morning showed that there is some people who are looking to respect some norm. And we will see that, in fact, when you try to respect some norm, in fact, we are looking finally implicitly to be recognized by the community, by the society. So it's another way, in fact, to explain the fact that people are looking for that, and to have this kind of behavior, which is maybe two types, the pro-ecological or environmental behavior, and also the other one, which is the green lifestyle. Because people are looking, again, for this recognition. So just some quick overview of the concept. So it starts with Hegel, and he showed that it is a kind of ontological phenomenon, so it is really inside us. And after, in fact, the new approach, the modern one, is coming from Axel Honneth, and he proposed 3 spheres of recognition. So that's why, in fact, it is really interesting today to try to use that in different fields. And again, the economic one, the climate issues, and so on. So one, for example, very, for me, fantastic definition of recognition coming from Hegel is this one. I don't know if you match with this. No? In French, it is se sentir chez soi dans son autre. I don't know if you understand this. I think it is really a very unique definition to understand what could be the feeling of recognition, especially in the first sphere. Okay. So you see there are different types of sphere. So the first one is love, friendship, and so on. The other one is what we call rights, solidarity. Okay, so it is the third line. And it is related to different type of quality, like self-confidence, self-respect, and self-esteem. And it means that if you are able to have this kind of strength, in fact, it could be, of course, easier, according to psychological aspect, to be happier and so on. And of course, if it is not this, we have some misrecognition. And of course, you understand that it's not so good in terms of well-being and so on. So you see, there are different spheres in the way to understand recognition. So this is one book, for example, the first one, and we try to see that people are always looking at it's like a struggle of recognition. And it is, for example, easy to understand, like you remember in France, the yellow jackets, in fact, they are not looking only for money, but are looking also for recognition. It's another way maybe to explain the protestation and so on. So there are 3 spheres. You understand the love, solidarity, and rights. And what is interesting in this kind of, sorry. What? Then what is interesting in this case is to see that there is a link between the 3 spheres, in fact. So it means that it is a kind of plasticity. It's possible to compensate finally. For example, if it's not so much recognition in one sphere, the idea is to be possible to compensate and to search for another recognition in another sphere, for example, and so on. And that's why we can have a kind of possible connection of the idea of defensive growth, for example, and so on. So people who, for example, have not so much relationship, they're looking for maybe a higher conspicuous conception and so on. So that's maybe another possible explanation. So I just going fast because it's something that I already explained, but you understand that love is going to self-confidence, which is something which really, in fact, give the quality of people to have, of course, some force, finally, to be happier. And of course, we have behind that this kind of process and so on. Again, rights, of course, this is coming also to, for example, Stephanie explained about also the minorities and so on. So everybody have the right to have the same respect, the equalities and so on in the community. So, and the last one is solidarity, which is much more related to the markets and the organization and so on. So everybody is looking for kind of socialist team, for example, at the end. And so in the first article, I tried to see if there is some correlation between all of this sphere and happiness. And yes, we find that it is the case, and have this first result. And the idea really is to say that according to this quality, again, we have this possibility to observe this first result. Okay. The next step is this one, is the fact that Honneth, since this last book, observed that finally the way to explain, to define, and to feel recognition is not the same according to the culture. For example, there are some difference in France, Germany, and UK. French people are much more negative in the way to understand and to live recognition. In fact, they do something which is like they can lose the authenticity, for example, and so on. And in the case of Germany, for example, coming from all of this thinking, it is a little bit different. And in this case, in fact, they are looking for a kind of rationality. So it's possible then to have a kind of self-determination and so on. And in the case of UK, it's a little bit different. They just have this kind of control moral, and then it's possible for them to follow and to respect a kind of norm. And that's the idea. You see then the search for recognition is different. And then, of course, we can have the hypothesis, the fact to adopt this kind of looking for recognition will be, of course, different. And of course, the possible impact on happiness, as you can imagine. So it is interesting because maybe in the case of French people, for example, we have this kind of situation. And don't forget that, the other is the person and the society as a whole, in fact. It is not just some intimate relationship. And I think it is something that we have to keep in mind. Okay. And that could be interesting. So I just go because I already explained that. And what could be interesting, for example, in the case of France, maybe I can just coming back to here, is to explain, for example, the French paradox, because you know maybe the story, the idea that normally French people should be happier according to many objective indicators. So we don't know really why. Claudia Senig tried to explain because of French Revolution, because of historical and cultural aspects. It is maybe because also of this why not possible explanation. And then we can use some article like Sarracino, Stefano, and so on, and try to see this kind of research objective, if really, in fact, this kind of approach could explain something. And to see that finally, yes, there is a possible, in fact, kind of compensation between, of course, the three spheres, and to understand that in another way. And in fact, another way, of course, is to consider that, again, as I said before, recognition could be a possible explanation of finally, yes, I would finish, it's really quick. Finally, the idea is to say that people adopt some behavior because they are looking for recognition and according to different type of culture. So French people are much more negative and maybe they do too much, in fact, in order to don't lose, in fact, the possibility to have some kind of approbation coming from the other. German is a little bit different, they are more rational. And UK is also something that they have just to choose or to follow the norm. So this is the idea of Honneth. So maybe we can discuss about that later. And then, of course, maybe is to see if really we observe that in terms of different type of behavior in the different countries according to the three spheres after that. And to observe is really we have something which is different, and after that, why not to set up some different type of policies in terms to have some suitable policies according to this different type of possible behaviors according to how people behave, to the possible reaction coming from the other with a major O, of course, again, the person and the society as a whole. So to conclude, so of course you observe that it's really a conceptual research for the moment, based on some stated facts. There is some data issues, and why not, in fact, to go to something that could be a kind of subjective recognition, because recognition could be something which is like happiness. We just feel something, and not only something which is objective. So it's an open question. Why not to see if there is some possible analysis based on the difference between emotional and cognitive well-being? Again, it's an open question. I just ask you. It could be interesting to have some advice coming from you. How to improve recognition in order to improve happiness? That's also something that could be, I think, interesting. And why not to see if there is some recognition goods? But finally, it's really to say that we can observe, or maybe the intuition is this one. And that's the idea, the fundamental idea. People who are organized, in fact, are more likely to consume in a more ecological friendly way. In fact, that's the idea, and to have less defense consuming. This is the idea, and to be much more, in fact, aware about these issues. And the reflection, and in fact, maybe we can say that that could be a kind of new narrative using this approach coming from Schiller, for example. The idea that maybe the leaders should take this into account, and to say that we need to take this idea of recognition in order to, for example, facilitate some this kind of behavior and so. And the reflection finally is this one, is to consider that maybe, yes, we have this kind of positive link between happiness and recognition, which open, in fact, something which is a new way to implementing some good rules and practice to have something which is how we live together in order to avoid conflict. And of course, then something which is both individual well-being, but also collective well-being. And so I can conclude, and of course, with a positive impact on climate issues. So I think this is the end. Okay.
I'm very struck by this idea of recognition, which explains many things, even more than those that you emphasize. For instance, Francesco, Giulia, and I made a paper showing that the less social capital people have, and the more they compare each other. Social comparisons arise. The ideal terrain for social comparisons is loneliness. Mm. And social competition, positional competition, competitive consumptions can be all ways to search for recognition. And I'm thinking also of the political implications of your idea. The decline of community, the loss of social capital created an enormous need for recognition, which is filled by nationalism. Nationalism provides recognition. You're a part of the nation. You're not alone. So there's no question. It's just a comment.
Thank you. I think employing philosophically thick concepts like recognition is truly fascinating, in some sense very, very radical and going beyond what we're usually doing. And I think this should be pursued and this should be done. But what struck me as what you're doing is when you're testing this via defensive consumption in data sets that exists, I was struck, isn't recognition not also linked to social status and status seeking? So individuals seek status because that's a form of recognition. I got my title, and that's a societal form of recognition. I drive my big BMW, and that's how society tells me I'm recognized as doing something worthwhile. Although, of course, we do these things for other reasons. So this is an indirect test because the data sets are not really allowing you this. And I would encourage you to really do your own data set and think about how to ask people about recognition, to see what's going on, see whether there are differences. And I don't want that to sound critical, but if I've studied philosophy, so I have a huge sympathy for philosophy. But what ticked me off as a happiness researcher is philosophers always having these grand ideas and talking about paradoxes of happiness. And empirically, not all of them have really borne out. So when Hegel says something really beautiful, or Axel Honneth says something really beautiful that seems plausible to us, I think the first step should be, or would be, let's actually ask these questions. Let's take their concepts. Let's ask people about that and find out, is Honneth, is Hegel, is whoever, are these hunches of those armchair philosophers? I'm not saying that derogatory, because that's what they did, right? They were looking at that. Are they true? Are people feeling that way? Are people really substituting, if I don't have recognition in my job, I seek recognition in my family? All this, I think we would need to ask people, because I don't see how we have the data in these big data sets, but I think it would be very, very worthwhile and very, very interesting to do that.
Yes, the answer is yes, of course. Should I develop? I totally agree, of course.
So this might be another one of those, more of a comment, less of a question, but to the question you put forward about how to improve recognition, to improve happiness, like, it made me think about the conversation actually that we had walking to dinner last night. And I'm curious if you can say something about your thoughts on like the role of like infrastructure and like building spaces for people to be together, as like a policy intervention, and how that might work to shape both happiness, but then also like improve recognition, improve happiness through the channel of like bringing people together, but also through the channel of having people in green space.
Mm-hmm. So about social stature, actually, I agree. This is one part of recognition, just one, in fact, and it could be a proxy to analyze, of course, recognition. And I totally agree that this concept for data could be elusive in a certain way, and it's not easy. That's the main difficulty, of course, how to pass to this conceptual thinking to something which could be practical and based on empirical research. So, but I think, as you say, the best way is to have their own questionnaire and to have something which is based on feeling subjective rather to something based on proxy, because it would be too proxy finally. And yeah, the green space or something that could be facilitate exchange between people could be something, okay, I have the possibility to meet people, so, and as other maybe, and that the feeling could be this one, but not easy to relate that now just to recognition. We cannot see recognition everywhere also, of course, but sometimes it could be really a simple relation. That could be also enough sometimes, of course.